The consistency of those lines and the distance that they are apart, we've talked about that, or there's been talk, I think even Petrie said something about that it looks like a feed rate. That can be possible. What we do see is that there is a consistency in the distance between the lines. When you look at it by hand, they do appear to be helical in nature, or spiral, because there is a little bit of taper on it. But it is tapered, and that's a significant piece of forensic evidence to try and determine what caused that. Most of the actual holes produced that I've seen, and without being able to bore measure them, they look very straight. So it's easy to see why they would automatically jump to the assumption that these were, meant for royalty and so on and so forth. And some of them are very precisely made.
What is the highest level of tech necessary, you think, to achieve that? Like, you think you can do it with wooden wheels?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think it's more about method than it is about, complicated technology as we see it today.
Hi everyone, thanks for tuning in. If you are enjoying the show and want to support me, there are a few ways you can help. By becoming a Patreon member, you will get access to Discord, exclusive content, and behind-the-scenes updates on my research. For instance, I recently traveled to London to scan pre-dynastic vases at the Petrie Museum. Your support makes that possible. Just search for Ancient Technology on Patreon, or check the links in the description for all donation options. Your support not only keeps the podcast going, but also funds the research behind it, covering costs like equipment and travel. Thanks again for being here, and I'm excited to keep bringing you more great content and discoveries. This episode was made possible by Shining 3D and its remarkable device, the FreeScan Combo Plus. But now, let's jump back to the show. So...
Yeah, I was kind of asleep there for a second.
Sorry.
So, Snake Bros, Chris King, thank you for coming on the show. It's a pleasure. Cheers.
Cheers. Cheers.
Oh,
Oh, crossing the streams there.
there we go.
Creamy pint.
How many different things could we have? Okay.
What's that? Coke?
Yeah, Pepsi.
Pepsi. So, it's been a long journey, 10 days, and we are going home tomorrow. But we had 2 appointments, a lot of scanning projects, and we scanned a lot of things: cores, vessels, bowls, vases, fragments, and it was actually a very complex, enduring job. I think we had to do a lot of measurements. We had to do the 3D scanning, the caliper measurements, endoscopic measurements, and the photogrammetry, or not photogrammetry, but making some real high quality photos of the pieces we have examined. And I wanted to sit down with you to talk about this entire journey and this trip, and especially with Chris King, about your insights and what you have seen there as a precision manufacturer expert.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, the Snake Bros helped a lot. Actually, I couldn't do it without you guys. Today you saved the day, actually, and the entire
Totally saved the day.
project, because yeah, we just forget the turntable. So
It was a quest.
yeah. But thank you.
Yeah, no problem. I was glad to help.
Yeah, there was a lot of things to think about, and it just been forgotten. I don't know. But Kyle was helping with the endoscopic measurements and other footage. And you brought actually a stand, which is behind us.
Yeah.
Came equipped.
Nice little turntable where you can rotate. One full rotation of your hand is only 10 degrees on the table, so you can it's a very smooth motion. Yeah, it's back there. So
we'll yank it over here.
yeah, my thought after listening to everything, like what your goals were and what the capabilities of your scanner was, that it would be nice to capture
I think it's pretty cool.
the texture.
Yeah, because the scanner cannot capture the texture. It's only going for the geometry and yeah.
Yeah. So the endoscope was an attempt to get inside the vases. I don't know how useful that's going to be. I think we actually need a special camera for that. Like it's something not designed to go up sewer pipes, you know.
Yeah.
But maybe it'll be useful. However, the turntable was really nice, and to capture video of the outside, to just be able to see in detail all the features up close. And this, ladies and gentlemen, is the turntable. Rotary table, whatever you call it. Yeah, that thing turned out to be very useful.
Yes. Yeah. Especially with the very high quality shots, because with these shots we can show you what we have been examining.
Yeah.
Because with the scans you cannot really see these very rich colors and this interesting painting. Actually, we also scanned a pre-dynastic pottery vase, which was found in a Nagada tomb, Nagada culture tomb, basically. And yeah, purely with the scans, it wouldn't be able to, or we wouldn't be able to show it to you. But with those high-quality photos and videos, yes.
Can I mention one other thing? I said I wasn't going to talk, and now I'm just talking. But yeah, he knew it was. He knew I was full of it.
it was coming.
One thing we discussed last night, which was really cool, was the 18th dynasty carvings of how they made the vases. Right? They're making them by hand. And in the museum today, they helped us look through their archive and find all of the 18th dynasty or later alabaster vases. There weren't hard stone ones, but the alabaster. And so we went through and found the best one that had provenance that you could.
It's actually, it's nice. It's quite nice. It's not symmetrical, or not that symmetrical as the other ones we have scanned.
Mm-hmm.
But the bottom is a bit
Well,
tilted.
it clearly matches the manufacturing method that's depicted.
Exactly. And we looked, and there were like really wonky ones, and we're like, no, we need one that's the best one that you have in here that's from that period, that we can definitely date to that period.
That's funny, you know, because at the British Museum, the two very large carved stone vases, the one that's breccia and porphyry or whatever, andesite, porphyry, that are like boulders. Yeah. Directly above it is a photo of that 18th dynasty depiction of them. It's a picture of the
relief.
the relief.
I think it's the same photo which we have seen in the Saqqara Museum, or the Imhotep Museum in Saqqara.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a picture of the relief, and then next to it, there's the text the museum gives, and they don't mention the relief at all in the text or the method that's depicted in the relief. They just say these were high-quality vases made for the royalty, basically. It's just interesting. Like, they put it up there because surely people are going to look at it and be like, how did they make this? Oh, but they never say that.
It was interesting that when we would look at the pictures or walk through the museum, you'd see an alabaster vase that looked really good. Yeah. And I'm like, I would give her the number. She'd look it up, and she's like, oh, it's early period.
Yeah, early period.
All the best ones were old.
Old, yeah.
Not like long before that little relief.
Yeah.
Just like that spot with the big vases, with that depiction of the method, There was another one that was on the kind of island display where they were showing a really nice vase, and then they had the drills. And the drills were, fractured or chipped flint.
Oh, yeah.
And, clearly a lot of these pieces that show some of the most symmetrical features and stuff look like they've been hole sawed,
Right.
not drilled.
Drilled. Yeah. Yeah, that's a good point. There was a small, beautiful vase, and then there's 3 flint pieces above it. Yep. I remember that as well.
And so the depiction shows them turning drills into what looks like an alabaster vase of some sort or whatever. And that would be consistent with the results that we found on those later pieces, is that the symmetry is highly affected by how you approach carving it. And if you're turning the tools and not the work, then the tools can kind of go wherever they want. You can't really tell as easily. But if you're turning the work, then it's easier to keep things centered and symmetrical and all that kind of thing. At least that's mine.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So I think it all supports. It's just, I don't want to say it's sad, but it's unfortunate that there's not a clear knowledge on this stuff. And when you go to a museum and these things are right next to each other, of course you're going to assume, well, that's how they did this.
Yeah, that's right.
What was the most surprising piece for you?
In what we looked at?
Yeah.
Well, there was 2 things. One, there was a collection of pieces, mostly small vases, that had a feature on the bottom that really kind of supported my idea about how these things were made. So that was pretty exciting to see, and it's really consistent across a lot of pieces now. And the other one was the thin diorite open vase. That was an amazing
It's like a fluted
piece.
shape or something?
It comes up and open, kind of like a flower vase, right? And has a big flange on the top. It was, of course, somewhat broken or chipped, but the wall thickness of that was like this glass. That was the wall thickness of it. And it was very smooth across the middle, and the transition in the corner out to this flange was, I was looking at this with my loop. It was just an amazing piece. That's the one I like the best. I think the
flange was like this long
This
on the top,
wide,
just
yeah.
this thin
it's this thin,
lip coming out of the top.
like less than like 3/32 of an inch or 2.5 millimeters thick. I'm converting on the fly in my head here. Yeah. There's all of the pieces are beautiful.
Even the pottery ones.
Even the pottery ones. They're so striking. You just want to have one of these, they're so cool. So it's easy to see why they would automatically jump to the assumption that these were, meant for royalty and so on and so forth. They're striking pieces of art.
Yeah.
And some of them are very precisely made.
And you think that's achievable? What is the highest level of tech necessary, you think, to achieve that? Like, you think you can do it with wooden wheels?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think it's more about method than it is about, complicated technology as we see it today.
Okay.
Like electronics and CNCs and all that. You don't need all that stuff. There's just some really basic things that then you can achieve symmetry in features that rival what we do today. So,
As long as the work is turning.
as long as the work is turning, it's much easier to achieve a inside of a vase that's concentric with the outside and roundness of those features. You don't necessarily need to be able to measure or produce things that are exactly the same. Like there's not 100 vases that are exactly the same. In fact, all the vases we looked at, there's a bunch of small ones. They're all just a little bit different in size. They all look the same. If you brought one out and you put it down and says, okay, look at that, take it away, put the next one down, you'd think it was identical because it looks really close. So they're not measuring from vase to vase to say this has to follow this blueprint. Right. They're creating a balanced shape on it that in a style of that shape that looks identical to a lot of them, and they vary just a little bit in some cases. But then when they produce it, it comes out very round, and in most of the time concentric to the hole that they put in the middle of it, and perpendicular to the top flange, let's say. All of those seem to be present on most of them. Now, there are some somewhat hand-worked ones that aren't quite like that, but the ones that are, they're pretty easy to spot. And I think that's producible with a very simple spindle and a way to hold the material.
And what do you mean by spindle? Like,
basically a shaft of some sort that spins in some kind of bushing or bearing, that a simple shaft that's reasonably round, spinning in a held reasonably firm in a set of bushings will turn a very perfect circle.
okay.
It's surprising how well that can work. There are some principles about why that works that way, but you don't need ABEC grade 9 bearings on a hardened steel spindle to do that level of work. You can't turn it very fast because they don't deal with friction well.
And you don't think that would be a problem if they're turning it?
I don't think they're turning it fast. I think they're going fairly slow relative to what we do today on CNCs.
Do you think that without a rigid bearing, you would need to use grinding as like an abrasion as opposed to like cutting tool?
I lean that way, definitely. A lot of the signs I see on the parts look more like an abrasive was used on it, whether it be like an abrasive file of a sort or maybe a spinning wheel of some sort, as opposed to like a scraping kind
hard
of tool
that's just, yeah.
I mean, that may be possible too. I mean, I'm not going to say that we know how they've been cut, but I can say that the features demonstrate that they were cut in a single holding with a spindle. Did you get these kinds of relativities between inside and outside and perpendicular face? You kind of get all that for free. And you don't need to measure it. It's not a measured thing. It just happens because that's the way you made it. And it, like I said, it can rival the kind of results that we would get if I, made one of these on my CNC at the shop.
Do you have any plans to do that?
Sure.
That would be awesome. That would be awesome if you would, make some.
Yeah, it's all about time.
Not out of stone.
I mean, I have plans to make just, whittle one out of aluminum.
Yeah.
And cut it off in the method that I think that they're doing.
Okay.
And then to move to concrete with big aggregate in it to simulate
the breccia.
Yeah, the breccia and the porphyry that we see, and then to move to granite and see what we can do with that.
What kind of are you going to get? Like the Aswadian granite, or are you going to do Georgia granite?
We'll start with whatever I get.
I would love to have a Georgia granite base.
Well, give me a piece.
Okay. It's fine grain.
I got
it
the
would
equipment.
Be beautiful polish.
And anywhere from using, I'll start on the CNC because that's easy. But I can, of course, move to something that demonstrates just the spindle and something a little bit more like wood turning, where you're not using electronics to guide your tool.
Okay.
The other possibility for potentially following exact geometry would be to use a pantograph to move a tool across something, and then create your geometry.
You know what that is?
In 20 times.
Yeah. Okay, I don't know what that is.
Pantograph is merely just a quick system of levers, or I guess that's the best way to call it.
Maybe I can find a picture.
Where you have a couple of pivot points, like a parallelogram that's created between that.
Okay.
And where you have, you locate one end of it on a central pivot point, and then the other becomes the stylus to follow a pattern. And as you move it in and out, if you connect a cutter to a closer into this close pivot, it has a natural reduction effect. On all these movements get reduced down to a small size.
Okay, I have heard of that using the stylus.
If you've seen nameplates on the 50s desks that were carved into that layered plastic where you see the white underneath the black,
Yeah.
those were done on pantographs.
Okay.
They had a pattern for the letter. They could scale the size of the letter up and down. They'd follow that pattern, and it would, they had a little Dremel or something that would carve into the plastic. They also had 3D pantographs that could do it in 3D. So that simple concept, you can find the diagram, that simple concept you can do by just kind of nailing a few sticks together. So that could be possible. I'm not saying that that's what they did.
Yeah.
But if we start entering into the idea that there was complex geometry that was being practiced on these things, and how would you then get it onto a vase, you could do the layout of the complex geometry in big scale, where you could more easily perhaps measure it in relativity of big radius to small radius, because they all fit a ratio, right? You could lay it out in a big scale and follow it very easily by hand and reduce it down to a pot this big, and you'd say, oh man, that thing was made on the best CNCs we have these days.
Yeah.
Because your errors get reduced.
Your errors get reduced way out. And that, that system can work in reverse too. You can follow a small pattern and make it really big.
Yeah.
But generally,
you
it's
have
the other
giant
way.
errors over there. Yeah.
The first few vases were analyzed, and the circularity along the vase body was ranging between 20 and 200 microns in standard deviation. What do you think about that kind of measure? Is it possible to create kind of a spindle with ancient materials or raw materials which they could find back then, and reproduce this kind of
Based on that simple principle, I think it's completely possible.
like with a journal bearing?
A journal bearing, camel blubber as a lubricant. I mean, it can be very simple. So older bearings, shafts spinning in packing, so to speak, they'd use hardwood, like lingam vitae and African blackwood and things like that. And those are found not too far from Egypt. Those are all African hardwoods. The spindle itself could have been out of a hardwood as well. It could have been out of stone. There's lots of possibilities. I think that could, there's a whole subject of just exploring how you might make one of these things with some simple materials. And
They had copper.
they had copper. We don't know how far back, but they had copper.
Yeah.
I'm imagining they had copper when they were making these things. Hard to say. I'm not going to nail that one down. But copper could have been used to produce a spindle, especially if it was alloyed with something like arsenic or whatever that gives you a harder copper. Even tin making bronze. I don't know that it needs to be that hard. I mean, it would be a little more rigid if it was harder as opposed. But those hardwoods are kind of amazingly stout. The other thing is scale. Your spindle doesn't need to be small. It can be big and still do small work.
Yeah.
So if there's issues with rigidity, that can somewhat be solved by the size of your equipment, the size of the spindle that you make.
I know they had, there's big cedar pieces in, is it the Bent Pyramid? Yeah. I wonder what hardwoods they had or what's in the archaeological record.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Don't know. Once again,
Cedars of Lebanon.
Cedars of Lebanon, yeah.
you could
Famous.
use the
Hardwood of
cedar
cedar.
as the bushing
Yeah.
and granite as the spindle.
Hard to imagine them spinning one of those giant.
I mean, I think that's a detail right now, not to focus so much.
Yeah, I'm just...
The concept of being able to make a simple spindle that actually turns a very true circle is easily achievable. It's just a principle, right? And floating in a boundary layer of some kind of lubricant helps the trueness of that circle. So to be able to produce roundness on something that you're turning, I think a spindle can be produced to produce that level of roundness.
All right, so let's
fairly easily.
One more question then on the spindle. Let's go think again about these boulders that are in the museum. So now you got it, right?
Yeah, they're big.
Yeah.
Once again, it's just scale.
Yeah.
And we don't
But that
know.
thing is not going to want to, the raw piece is not going to want to spin straight. It's going to want to tear your spindle out of the bearing.
Well, once again, you know, we when we say lathe or something like that, we generally think that this is a spindle that's axis is horizontal, but they can also be vertical.
Yeah, but it's still going to want to, you know, whatever.
Yeah, but at least you're not working against gravity.
Yeah, that's true.
If an example, like this is your spindle, right? And you got your work up there. We're turning this, right? Now I'm not working against gravity on how I'm doing this. It's like the potter's wheel.
Yeah.
And it would support something that was heavier, as opposed to kind of like hanging
From it, yeah.
spill that, but yeah. Can't take me anywhere. So I think that, like your buddy with the nitron, I think that's a simple problem to solve because it's not the principle.
There's one in the Egyptian Museum that's, I think, this tall. It's what, 2 feet?
So typically, even in kind of today's world, 21st century, smaller lathe work tends to be done on horizontal axis spindles, and bigger lathe work tends to be done on vertical. Yeah. Well, that's kind of the way we do
But
it now.
you usually, like, I think you usually start out with something that's already balanced for them. You get a nice cylinder of material to start with, right?
Yeah.
But this case, you're starting with a freaking boulder.
Well, not necessarily. I mean,
Not balanced.
there's no reason that you couldn't have a big core drill, or a big tube drill, to make a core that then you use as your material to make
So
one
you
of those.
core it out and then use that as the material. Yeah.
That becomes your starting material.
Yeah, that would.
So now you have something round. In fact, one of the cores we just looked at, I measured that was round to about 1/1000th of an inch. And that's just the waist.
The hinges at Karnak
Yeah.
made vases like this big around,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah.
Then there was that photo that just got floated around of the place in Italy. Might have been an AI photo.
Oh,
I don't know.
yeah.
Where the cores were like 5 feet
Cores were
diameter.
huge.
Oh, I've
Yeah.
seen
I
that
mean-
photo for a long time before.
Yeah.
That's an old photo.
Before AI, right? We know tube drills exist
Yeah.
some way or another because the evidence is all over the place of what they did. And cores exist. And you look at the core. I mean, if I was a craftsman and I saw a core laying on the ground, I'd pick it up and say, I'm going to make something out of this because this is easy. It's already half done.
Yeah.
Right? I don't have to rough it out of a boulder.
Right.
Right? And I would assume that in a lot of cases, they were probably trying to go for a reasonably good cross-section of material.
Yeah.
So they'd want to take it from base ground, like, right? So they're probably going to quarry for it,
Yeah. You want deep
as opposed
bedrock.
to just looking for, that boulder looks like it'd make a nice face.
Right. Yeah. Absolutely.
Be way more likely that you'd run into a inclusion or a crack or something that the thing would just explode on you, or you're trying to
Yep.
make it, right?
And I mean, this is a bit of a tangent question, but, you know, you do have to wonder how they broke those cores out of those giant.
Well, it's a brittle material, so stick a wedge in one side. Tink.
I think they. I
You're
think
looking
they,
at me
I
like-
think, yeah, I think they tried
that's a
that
tall
and
trick.
it didn't work. Yeah, but maybe you're right. I was just thinking, if you have a really big one, you could drive a bunch of wooden wedges on one side.
Well, how did
And do the
the later Egyptians that were using the dotted line method of breaking stuff, would they stick in the cracks?
Yeah.
wood and
Wet
got it
wood.
wet.
That's what I'm saying. Yeah.
And they use the power of
And then it
hydraulics.
splits it
Expand.
along the dotted lines. In this case, you're trying to break something this way using a wedge up here.
But the longer the core is, the more leverage you have. So
Yeah, you have more leverage, but it's breaking it on a different plane too.
Yeah.
Right.
But the focal
The
point's
wedge breaking is like about splitting it along the.
Yeah. But the point is that you're going to create a force on against a fixed surface, pushing against the thing that you want to break, and the thing's got a lot of leverage, and the stress focal point is at the bottom of the hole.
Yeah.
So it's most likely to break at the bottom, and that's
It's funny too
that's
to
what we
imagine
see.
if you try to use more than one wedge, then they are pushing against each other.
Yeah, no, you gotta just do it one direction.
But if you have a giant hole, you might be tempted to put 3 in there on one side, but they actually.
I would guess that, they probably came along and kind of went, put the wedge there.
Yeah. You look
Kind of
at it.
knew by looking at it which way was the likely way that it would break.
How did they learn all this?
Experience.
We don't have a process, it seems.
That was exactly the way we learn it today.
You know what I mean? There's no record of like a learning of this. It seems to go the other way. That's what's so interesting about it. It's like they know it all in the beginning.
We
and
have a
then they
record of them.
lose the knowledge.
Yeah, we have a record of
later.
them getting worse at it, not a record of them getting better at it. Yeah.
Well, yeah, at some point.
Yeah.
There was obviously a time where they got a lot better at it too. They were really good at it. And then something happened. Culture changed somehow. Ruler changed. Administration changed. And then all of a sudden they just got lost. A couple generations and that shit can just disappear. We see that happen now. I mean, my next door neighbor used to work for Intel. He was a high-level buyer. In fact, I think he was very high up. And I used to chide him about bringing stuff back to America to make, right? And so after a couple of years, he says, yeah, I've talked to the management into doing this. Execs are all into it, and we're starting to bring some stuff back. He says, do you know any sheet metal shops that know how to bend metal? And I said, well, from a little while ago, I can give you a couple names, but I can't vouch for where they're at now. And he says, yeah, because everybody we tried around here since the recession, a lot of people just retired. Now they don't know how to do it, and the knowledge has been lost. And a lot of this stuff is what we would call, in the shop, we call it tribal knowledge, right? People develop these skills amongst themselves, and they practice it, and someone comes in while it's being practiced, you learn it, and you carry it on. But if there's some kind of interruption of that, because it's tribal, it's not written down, and we didn't see it written anywhere,
Yeah.
it can just disappear
institutional
in a
knowledge,
generation or two.
Yeah.
I was wondering about these flamingos. You have seen these flamingos in the Nagada vases, the pottery vases, and you can also see these flamingos in the Aswan quarry.
Yeah.
And the Aswan quarry, they painted these flamingos on that part which was already have been quarried out. So it's like a piece, like a wall.
Very tall wall.
Yeah, and I don't know when flamingos were around in Egypt or in that area. But
Well, it's also an art style that predates dynastic Egyptian.
yeah, it predates it, but did the Nagada culture know how to quarry these big blocks? Or those places were already being quarried out when they were there? That's why they could paint the flamingos? Or, if they could quarry these huge blocks, why there is no record of that? We couldn't find those very pre-dynastic records of quarrying these blocks and making these vases, and I don't know. It was just
It is a good question.
weird to me.
They have flamingos there now.
Really?
Remember? Yeah, we went. They took us. We were.
Oh yeah,
We were driving along in the
Fayum,
and
Fayum Lake.
they said we'll take you up to this area of the lake because it's famous for having flamingos. And sure enough, we get out there and there's this enormous, thousands of them standing in the shallow area of the lake. And of course, Christian goes walking out there. Yeah.
Don't be in the flight path.
The painting style, though, is kind
Very
of same.
yes, it's very
or
distinctive.
Very similar.
Yeah, it's the and then we saw it also in the where is it the Nubian Museum there where they have the sort of a fake cave that you walk through with all the old cave drawings and stuff, and you can see like this this style is distinctive of those Savannah people that lived in that area. Yeah.
So I don't know. I was just wondering if it's, how could it be that those flamingos are already there? Potentially from a very earlier culture. I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah, that is weird.
Some great questions like that.
Well, we know the Romans never attacked that wall. There are none of those marks in it. They never tried to quarry anything there. That one wall is very old.
Yeah.
It's that totally different style.
I
It's
have a
an early
scan of
style.
that wall. I can put it in the video.
Yeah, and it's a lot of that quarry was filled with rubble, right? They've spent a lot of time to get like even the unfinished obelisk, which is way up above that spot that you're talking about, was covered in meters of boulders and material and cast off.
So it's kind of recently excavated.
Yeah, they've been excavating it. Yeah.
What's your take on the cores? You've finally seen and you could handle the Petrie Core number 7. And you were examining it for a while.
Yeah, I wanted to examine it longer.
We had to rush actually because we had 5 hours for 10 artifacts or more.
And they're very
Like, give it back.
proprietary about that. That's their star exhibit piece. I've seen some photos that have been circulated that kind of pick some bad spots in it where it's kind of hard to follow lines through it. The black material, which I'm guessing is the quartz, relative to the feldspar, appears to be an area that obviously cuts were difficult. But so far, based on what I've seen so far, most of the tracks, the deep grooves that I saw, would enter a black area and come out the other side of it intact, while it was a little bit more difficult to follow it through one of the quartz areas, black areas. Most of them came out the other side, seemingly lined up with how they went in. Now, that's not all of it. It's not every spot like that, but I saw more spots like that than I saw that it kind of got confused through there and maybe disappeared. Through the feldspar areas, they're very consistent. They're very aligned with each other, same distance apart, relatively speaking. We couldn't get any measurements on that. Hopefully we're going to be able to see some of that on the scans. The other interesting thing is that it is tapered. The taper is fairly slight, but it is tapered, and that's a significant piece of forensic evidence to try and determine what caused that. Most of the actual holes produced that I've seen, and without being able to bore measure them, they look very straight. So we have the desired hole that was produced with a tube saw that was very straight to within about an inch of the bottom. Yet these cores tend to be tapered over the whole length of them. There's a little bit of a perplexing circumstance there that I have some ideas about, but I don't have anything conclusive on that.
You can speculate.
I can speculate. Thank you. I'm free to speculate. Yeehaw! I still lean towards fixed abrasive. But free abrasive, fixed abrasive, I mean, there's arguments both ways. The consistency of those lines and the distance that they are apart, we've talked about that, or there's been talk, I think even Petrie said something about that it looks like a feed rate. that could be possible. What we do see is that there is a consistency in the distance between the lines. When you look at it by hand, they do appear to be helical in nature, or spiral, because there is a little bit of taper on it. Whether or not that means that was the feed rate, I can't say. It would be an impressive feed rate. We all know that.
I hope we can evaluate the data.
Yes, we're going to evaluate the data. So
it makes me think of something threaded, almost like.
Well, yeah, I was imagining one thing nobody's explored so far is the possibility that they were able to cast at least the end of their tubes for tube drills.
Mm.
And if you could cast it, you could cast abrasive into it. Then you would have fixed point abrasive. You could also cast a shape into it. So the outsides could be straight and the insides could be a long taper. That was intended to keep the tube from chattering around as it was going down the hole, potentially producing a straighter hole. The other thing is, when you're trying to core into something like that, you're going to produce a lot of waste. How do you get the waste out of the hole?
Threads. That's why I was wondering about threads. Like if it was
threads or perhaps flutes.
Flutes.
If you had an inside that had how can I say it? If you've got points and you can start it start making essentially a thread.
Yeah.
Once you get some of that created, it will follow those, and that helps the pressure for the feed rate.
Yeah.
It's kind of an interesting thing. You can take a piece of sandpaper on a piece of metal spinning in a lathe, and if you squeeze on it to sand it, once you start moving, it'll start helping.
It helps you propel it, yeah.
Because it's using the grooves it's making right behind that to act like a thread. So there's a possibility that helical set of lines, if in fact that's what it is, could have helped advance the tool.
Yeah.
It could also help if there were flutes that came up on the inside, which once again you could cast if you understood that. The flutes could help evacuate the material up the... You really don't want that spent material to come up the outside. If you're looking to produce a straight diameter hole, you really don't want it wearing on the outside so much. So anything that helps get it up the inside would be better.
I wonder, I think I see what you're saying there, and I wonder because when we look at the holes themselves, they don't show such regular striations that the core did. So I wonder if the material is coming up the outside, and that's why the striations on the outside of the holes that we see are all messed up, and there's less coming up the core, and that's why the core seems to have more consistent spiral or helical or spiral.
Well, if the tube drill had fluting on the inside, that would allow that stuff to come up, then it may have less an effect on the actual core because you're not trapping it as much. You're giving it a place to actually come out. On the outside, I don't know that they would do fluting, but yeah, you could, or, you see cross holes and things like that catch some of that stuff. The other interesting thing is we don't really see any evidence that the tool was extracted while it was turning. So you'd have kind of a fast helix as it came out.
Yeah.
I don't see any evidence of that. We don't see it on the cores either. I haven't really seen any just straight vertical lines. I mean, these are all little pieces of forensic evidence that kind of, when you come up with an idea, you have to be able to kind of check all these off. It's like, okay, yeah, that all fits the model here.
There is one strange hole in Karnak. It's kind of a channel drill hole.
Oh yeah,
That was very interesting.
like they did some post carving around the. Yeah,
Yeah, and when I looked at the photograph that I'd taken it closer, those troughs or slots that were cut into that look more hand-worked.
Like you're gonna put something in there and then twist lock it.
Maybe,
You know,
or
the
maybe it
slot
was
going down and then the groove in the inside going this way.
maybe it was intended to carry lubrication into the hole. You know, if it was a hinge of some point, you probably want some of that whale blubber or something in
camel
there.
fat down in there. Whale blubber. I love this idea that they're like, the guys at the vase making place are like, are they going to bring us another whale? Because we're running out of lubricant here, man.
I'm sure it was coveted.
We got a big order for 40,000 vases.
Right.
We
Gotta
need,
keep
we
that
need another
spindle
whale.
moving.
What about the length of these cores? Because these we have scanned granite core, one granite core. That's the only granite core they have. The Petrie Core number 7. They had the diorite and the porphyry, maybe basalt, and we also scanned a few alabaster cores. But these are all relatively small cores.
The
Sure.
alabaster was, yeah.
So the harder stones are sometimes the longer cores, or they have longer cores made of harder stones.
So the small basalt one that we looked at, the lines were closer together.
It was more fine, yeah.
Yeah, it was more fine, but they were very consistent all the way down. Extremely consistent.
And they're not, I mean, they are a spiral-ish, a helix.
It's very difficult to tell. Of course, we're going to assume they are, but
I think they were also tapered.
and it was tapered.
It was tapered. Okay.
It had a taper on it. You know, when you look at those and you say, well, you know, this is a very hard material. It didn't look like it took a whole lot of effort to do that.
What about the length?
Didn't look like the tool struggled. Let's put it that way.
But
So I'm very used to seeing tool struggle marks.
but for example, in Giza, we have seen a lot of quite long drill holes.
Yeah.
With this fixed abrasive idea, also worked with these long holes.
It's going to work very similarly. In fact, you don't have to stand there and keep pouring abrasive into it. And especially, I hate to say the word, if they use something like diamond as that abrasive, those tools could actually last quite a long time.
Because I can imagine if as you are getting longer or deeper in the hole, no jokes.
You're saying lots of stuff here.
There's lots of fuel here.
So as you're getting deeper in the hole or you're cutting deeper, if you are using loose abrasive, it's harder to move the tool. It's getting even harder because it's kind of getting stuck more frequently.
Most of the people that have tried to do this, to say, oh yeah, this is the way they've done this.
They just drilled something like this, a few
Smaller
centimeters.
ones, they did, you know, reasonably deep holes, maybe 4 times the diameter, something like that. I haven't seen any that are like 10 times the diameter of the tool. And anything that got over
Like this one?
Yeah, and look how straight that is.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
I can send you this for the.
Yeah, that's
This is in front of the Great Pyramid.
the main entrance.
Yeah.
Right?
So nobody, and once they got above a certain size, like an inch or so, the only demonstration I saw was in like a 1/2 inch thick piece of granite tile or something like that. So it wasn't something that went down like that. I mean, that thing's probably 4 inches in diameter, something like that, and it's
like
2
this, and
feet
it's-
deep.
Yeah.
Now, you think about that for a second. So the core itself, we haven't found a core that long. That'd be really cool if we could, but I'm guessing we're not going to. My guess would
They
be
might have
is
been
that,
breaking them off.
yeah,
but-
they would core down a certain distance, and then they'd break that one on and do it again, and so on and so forth. Now, there may be we can examine that wall for some sign of where they may have done that break, because there might be a slight change that you can see in the finish on that wall. So that's one of the things I would look for on that.
Most likely the core itself
Has
not
some
the
stabilizing effect.
The core drill was maybe the tube was only this tall, and then it had a solid bar or whatever,
Or that
shaft,
that tapering in it that's helping keep it centered.
and also
That was only so long.
and also you can flush material out if you can shrink the diameter of the shaft. And you go down this far, and then you flush it out, break the core, and keep.
The one kind of cool thing that you kind of get for free in that is that once you've gotten down so far and you break that thing off and you stick the tool back in it, and it's going to be the same tool. So it's going to match the bottom. It's going to want to start recutting pretty much the way that it had left off. Not necessarily going to chatter or anything. And its alignment, if there's any kind of coasting on the hole by the rest of the tube, it's going to be even more aligned than when you started. So the chances of seeing a witness at the point where they would have stopped, broken, and then restarted, every time you go down, it's going to probably be less, because it's going to be more aligned up with how it left off.
Yeah, because the core never breaks off all the way at the bottom, so you have a little bit of
Yeah,
to
start.
set-
There's
to
still a
set
start
the- yeah.
But that's, I didn't get to see that one in person.
You got to do some sneaking.
I know. I did some sneaking, but I didn't get to see that. Some sneaking and some.
Yeah, lots of different kinds of sneaking. Yeah.
What about the
Yeah, it was really just for you guys came out. Check this out. And I'm just like, Dad, I was just up there. Why did you tell me I was there?
Sorry.
Yeah. But I mean, it would have taken some light and stuff. And, I'm going to be there with my fucking label down,
Yeah.
looking at these things. So,
what about the location of the hole?
location of the wall.
Yeah, because we're talking about, I think you mentioned a few days ago that it's weird that sometimes the hole is just on the ceiling and it probably not drilled. It was not drilled in a different position. So probably they built the building and drilled the core after. But that brings in another question, or that raises another interesting question. If you can apply the pressure to drill
Well,
on the ceiling.
or if you're using loose abrasive, how do you keep it up there? Now gravity's working against you. Yeah, exactly. Which kind of argues in the direction of a fixed abrasive, Although I think, once again, we're kind of stuck with this idea that these people were obviously cavemen and couldn't go beyond a certain level of technology. So loose sand instead of fixed abrasive. That seems to be a step that nobody wants to take. It's just really easy to say, well, they collected the sand on the beaches, up there on the Mediterranean. That's what they used because it had these, whatever. And that's fine. But it doesn't mean that they couldn't have taken abrasive media like that, or even from not too far across to Africa, and embedded it, whether it be cast into that copper or rolled into the surface. That's what jewelers do. So they roll diamond into the surface of soft copper and use a fixed abrasive. And, the better the abrasive is, the longer it's going to last. And you will wear copper away, obviously. The spent material that you're cutting, the quartz, is also going to act like an abrasive. So it's all going to work that way.
What if you cannot find copper residue on the vases? Because they have done...
Yeah, with the brief examination we did of multiple different fragments from beneath the step pyramid in a electron microscope, we didn't find any copper. Bits of tin and a couple of chunks of titanium. These may be contaminations. We don't know. Tin and what was the other one? Zinc and titanium, but
And iron?
iron, no copper at all.
maybe they made tubes out of iron.
Yeah. There was an iron plate found near the I don't remember which side, but near the exits of the King's Chamber shafts on the outside of the Great Pyramid, kind of wedged in to core masonry in a way that made people think it might be, and that it's not an artifact of a later time. But it's controversial, but it was a plate of a thin sheet, I think, of iron, some kind of iron artifact.
So iron's going to have similar qualities to copper in terms of its relative level of hardness and ductility and all those kinds of things. It would be easy to manipulate into a tube.
But you think it's not going to give you much? It's not going to be stronger, not unless you're starting to make steel.
Yeah, as soon as you get into steel, then you start talking a different story.
But then they had.
It's not hard to make steel. It's not hard to make steel.
They had meteoric iron,
Meteoric stuff, which is going to
which is basically steel, space steel.
Space steel
stainless.
with other alloying elements in it, like chrome and all these kinds of things, right? And they had.
And then it gets heated on its way down. Nice smelting.
It's branded as SS. Space steel.
Space steel. Yeah, we should start a company.
I think there's sources around Egypt that chrome can be had. So, there's a whole kind of controversial argument about, what metallurgy level did they function at? And once again, there's not a written record, but written records didn't really start happening until, 18th dynasty or so, right? So,
At least not that we have, yeah.
Thank you.
know what they did because they weren't recording it.
Yeah. Or if they were, we've lost the records. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there's always been this kind of class level. Jesus, pieces.
For the sponsors or future sponsors. Thank you very much.
Sound of freedom.
Sorry. It's not a proper glass.
I'll fill mine up since you're making all
Oh,
that
sorry.
noise.
I would have gotten this. I have a question. We talked about
Pour a little of that in here.
the possibility or just the capability of ultrasonic resonance and as an added
Now that
energy in drilling and cutting these stones. What do you think about that?
I think if you could add that to one of these tube drills, you may be able to achieve that feed rate that we've been seeing.
We need to do some experiments.
We need to do some experiments.
Do we have these tools to easily cut into or
We need to get that.
resonate a tool?
Yes.
Tools exist today.
We have these tools today, and you can buy them. $1,500. Jewelers use them. We interviewed a guy that was like using it to.
It uses a slurry, but it's a
It uses
ultrasonic. You can tune it to the material. You basically sit there and change the frequency until it plunges into the material. And there's a slurry.
But it won't leave these kind of striations like the Petrie Core has.
unless you're rotating the tool bit. But if the tool bit's stationary, it would not. But if you were turning the tool bit and the tool bit had fixed jewels also, then it would definitely dig this nice striation into. I think. I mean, that's my assumption.
And you would get the effect that was it Petrie that described how it looked like in some cases that it plunged through the quartz faster than the.
Yes.
So if you had tuned it closer to the frequency of cutting quartz than you had for the feldspar or mica or the other materials, then you would get this counterintuitive where it looks like it's cutting the quartz easier than the other material because it's the right frequency.
The quartz is more resonant.
More resonant, yeah.
And that's what I saw in the Petrie Core as well. The number 7 core.
I really think that this is
The quartz areas looked deeper, like they were more fractured away than the feldspar, which doesn't make sense with just something going by without vibrating or whatever. I mean, and I looked at a number of those I don't want to call them facets, but the veins of the quartz in there, they all had kind of the same look to them. They all looked deeper than the feldspar. And you'd think it'd be the other way around.
Yeah.
Not to mention every other surface aside from the striations is polished, right? There is a polish to the whole thing.
Yeah. The
Could that be
feldspars.
age and handling, or just sitting in the sand?
It's not
Or
going
is
to polish
that,
itself.
is that the result of the material moving out? Like this polish that it's getting from a resonating material that's moving up and around and coming out.
That's how we tumble stuff to
And see,
polish
that's
it.
what-
So
so-
that's actually a good observation.
The guy who was operating the microscope told us as well. He said he thought the way that the surfaces looked washed, and these are the inside surfaces, not the outside, but he was like, they look like they've been polished or cleaned very thoroughly. And he was saying this looks like an ultrasonic application as well.
Oh, interesting.
Outside and inside.
Ultrasonic.
We both of them, but the inside, he was just like, it's so flat, you know. We're looking at it with an electron scanning microscope, and you're expecting to see deep grooves, like I told you guys, with the copper tube that had been cut, or the copper bar. And there are these, it looks shiny, but when you looked at it under the microscope, there's these massive deep canyons through it that are not visible when you're just looking at it, you know. But then the surface of the vases on the inside was, I mean, incredibly smooth.
Because usually they are not even polished.
Well, this
Yeah.
it is possible that the fragments were from bowls or plates, or right? Isn't that a possibility?
Yeah, well, yes. Some of the smaller ones, we don't even know what the
shape was.
shape was, because it's too small, and there's just a bit of the core drill at the bottom, and you don't know if it went all the way around or whatever. But at least one of them, the larger piece, you could tell it was in it. You know, it's a bowl like this, but it was still somewhat open. But the inside was incredibly smooth, you know, relative to what you would expect to see, especially because you can, you know, we're trying to look at places where we know there's grooves in it, because you can see them like right under the lip.
Yeah.
And the grooves were there, but they were just incredibly regular, and the rest of it's just
To be flat.
all you see is like small deviations because of the material. There were almost no marks on it at all. It was amazing. Yeah.
Yeah, some of the ones I handled today had that same.
Yeah.
This white ball, I think it was also porphyry. No, it was diorite. This white,
Yeah, that one's pretty amazing.
slightly fractured, but
It's definitely got a polish on it that's very nice.
so your turning idea also applies
Oh yeah.
in case of this one too.
Well, in looking at the consistency of, you have a piece that looks like a spindle with two flanges, and the transitions from flange into spindle body were these radiuses, and especially at where it radiused into the top. If you followed that radius all the way around, it was extremely consistent. And you certainly didn't do that by pounding on it with another stone. There's also evidence of, you can see where there was some finishing happening on this, some final polishing or sanding, let's say. All of those sand lines on everything that I looked at, where you could see under the polished surface, a lot of times, like usually when we polish something, we move up in grit count or down in grit size, right? We go from 200 to 400 to 600, blah, blah, blah. If you don't do enough work with one of those, one of the previous more coarse ones, those scratches, you won't get them all out. So when you get down to this polish thing, they'll still be like the roots of some of those more coarse scratches. And you can see those, right? That's just it's a remnant of doing this multi-step process to go down to a fine finish on something. when you're doing each one of those progressive stages, you can't always tell that you've taken out the previous stage, that you've removed all of those grooves with this finer stage. So when you get further up that chain of going finer and finer, those will finally start appearing. So, and which stage was appearing? I don't know. How many stages do? I don't know. There's a few, whatever. But I could see the remnants of some of those. And those remnants generally were going in the direction of rotation if you were actually spinning it. They were not going axially. There might be a slight hatch angle to it. Like when you move sandpaper across something spinning, you're going to get like hatching on a cylinder wall in an automobile engine. You're going to get a little of that. I saw that definitely. But I didn't see anything that was like someone hand sanded this, because you'd go all different directions. Everything I looked at had that. And you could see where it gets harder. Like big open surfaces are generally easier to work that way. And you get into corners, it's harder because you can't move across it like this enough. Because every time you cross, you cut a little bit more material.
Yeah.
Right. But in corners, it's way harder to do this.
Yeah.
And so generally inside radiuses don't get finished quite to the same level as like a big field of spindle. And that was evident on the diorite one as well. And once again, making the turning look more obvious and more easier to see the true radius going all the way around the body. And we'll see, once again, I haven't seen the scan of that yet, but I think we'll definitely see it on the scan, how perfect that radius is going all the way around. That would be extremely difficult to do by hand. Yeah, it might be possible, but as demonstrated on the Russians' attempt to do a vase, they were able to achieve some reasonable roundness on their vase. But the way that they were trying to figure out where to take off the high spots is they had put their vase on a potter's wheel and were marking it with a pin. And they would take the high spots off. It's like, well, wait a minute. I thought you were doing this all by hand.
Yeah.
And now you're using a modern potter's wheel.
Turning the work.
Now you're turning the work again, right?
You're checking your work with a higher tech tool.
If you turned the work to begin with, you wouldn't have to use the pin to figure out where to pound on it with the stones.
It seems like not a big leap to go from like, well, we have to build this thing to spin the work to check how round it is, to just doing the work on the spinning thing to make the thing. In terms of technology development,
I think it demonstrates. They didn't even realize that they were demonstrating that they couldn't do it by hand.
Yeah.
They couldn't produce those tolerances by hand because they had to use a spindle.
It was a perfect demonstration of this, yeah.
Sorry. Nice try. I mean, it's great. I think they did a spectacular job at producing, a pretty interesting piece. But at the same time, they also proved how difficult it would be to do it by hand, because they could not do it to the point without using what we would now call modern technology.
Yeah.
Even if it was a Sharpie
and those measurements, what they did with the, sketchy caliper and
old-fashioned, like wood turner's calipers. Yeah.
I don't even know how they measure the wall thickness. You couldn't fit that caliper they used. You couldn't fit it into that vase they made. So what
Certainly
kind of
wasn't
wall
something
thickness?
like this.
No, this is more sophisticated.
And once again, like I use those every once in a while where I can't get something in it. And you can get a reasonably close measurement, but you really have to know what you're doing. And what I saw in their video was that they weren't taking those precautions. They were crooked and all this kind of stuff.
Yeah, exactly.
So you're not going to get it. You're going to get a measurement that maybe is plus or minus 10 thousandths. If you're lucky.
a few magnitudes of order higher.
Yeah. Now, if you're careful, you can get down to plus or minus 1,000th with one of those. But then you're going to be checking that with something that can tell
actually
you
measure
what that X number is, right?
Yeah, because they don't have a measurement; they just get the width, and they have to measure between.
Measure it on
so
something
you're
else.
introducing another area where you can have an error.
Exactly. And also they had kind of a tape on the tip of this tool.
Yeah,
Yeah,
had
the curator was very sensitive to them putting any marks in it, so they had to tape up the tips and like, okay.
Thank you, Petrie Museum, allowing this to use this one.
Well, we were extremely careful. Plus, these are carbide
I didn't use that. He did.
polished.
The professional use
They're
this.
polished to about a 4 RMS finish, so it's like a mirror. The likelihood of that scratching is extremely low.
Yeah, so the precision, or sorry, the accuracy of this thing is around 20 microns. And
Well, in a short time period comparison measurement,
yeah,
obviously you can look at that and go, oh, the length of that and some temperature, that could send it all over the place. So we're not tracing this net back to the National Bureau of Standards.
Yeah.
yeah, of course.
Small variation.
But we let it there.
You left it there for hours, and then you zero it out.
And we also let it there to warm up.
It's still zero.
We also let the scanner there to warm up to the...
I didn't hold on to this, so I wasn't heating it up. It was clamped into a vise like this, which is a big deal. I mean, that's why they put pads on calipers. They're insulators.
Yeah.
To keep because some people's hands are really hot. We have this problem.
And I assume that's why they have this kind of trigger here. To
Don't have to grab the.
Well, go ahead. Sorry.
I just wanted to a little bit focus on this reproduction, vase reproduction, Scientist Against Myth channel, because I really appreciate that they took this kind of effort, like 2 years working on this, because no one else did. And that woman who did this is very skilled.
Yes, she developed more skill as she went.
Yes, they actually realized which kind of methods would work better, and they kind of developed and improved their technology.
In less than a generation.
Yeah, that was.
But I think the measurements they made and the comparison they made was not really...
It was a little misleading.
it was misleading.
Not intentionally.
It was not, probably not intentionally, but it was not correct. It was not really scientific, in my opinion. And
Or metrological.
in meteorological point of view, yes. And also, we couldn't really compare their results with ours because they didn't make the same measurements. They didn't measure the same kind of aspects or same kind of features. And I don't know why it's considered as a debunking material, but it's good to have some kind of proof that it cannot be done by traditional methods, hand, basically.
Yep, I agree. I thought that was really cool that they did that. However, the point that he made about the turntable is a really good point. Like, you can't do it without that technology. And the other thing that I thought that they developed their own technology so far within just this short period of time, and it made me wonder, like, what limits were set to how good their technology could get. They started with this process and then realized, oh, we need to build this and do it this way and all that, and it's like they did that within the making of one vase. You made 40,000 of them, and you continue that trend of developing technology. Why is it hard to imagine that they developed the spindle and the lathe and these other methods for cutting stone?
And whatever these
That was
tools were.
sort of a little bit of proof to me that, like, well, maybe they did. You did it in 2 years and changed your technology quite a bit. It was a great experiment, no doubt.
Right. Well, I guess one thing you would say about that is the people doing the experiment know about these other techs. They're trying not to use them. right? Whereas with these ancients, you're saying that they must develop them in the process. Like they don't know about them. There's no concept of spinning something to make, right, or a wheel or a bearing or any kind of concept like that, and they have to come up with it, right? So you're starting out with some guy who's just like, I'm going to bang a rock on something and to try to shape another rock into a shape I want. And then over the course of that, he develops wheels and spindles and bearings, and he needs whale blubber, and he's out in the desert. He doesn't know about whales unless he's been to the Valley of the Whales, but there's no blubber there, right?
It's behind the Valley of the Kings.
I know what you're saying.
I'm not arguing with you. I'm just saying, like, this is the mindset of like, let's start with a very primitive guy and he wants to make a bowl, right, out of a rock. But I agree with you that if somebody's doing that, and obviously based on the pieces they ended up making, they got really good at it, and they were making beautiful pieces, and it's probably because they developed their process to the point to where they were spinning the work, like you're saying, and using fixed abrasive.
Yeah, it's not hard to make that leap.
Yeah.
Especially, well, I just have to say, just the detail of using the bow with this. First, you've got this picture of this guy doing this, right? Yeah. Well, then there's other pictures of the guy with the bow, with the string that goes around, and he's
bow drill, yeah.
And so you're holding a rock over top of the stick because you can't hold the stick, so you've got this bearing, and then you've got the work down here, and you're spinning this, and it's like, we need to make something to do this work for me because I'm tired of doing this. Yeah. This is kind of the stuff that they did in their video, where they were like tying new things with leather straps and all this stuff.
So that's what I think is funny.
Making better spindles and making them work more efficiently. And it's like, yeah, this is.
So that whole bow and stick thing that they were, the stick was the drill or whatever, right? But they're spinning the stick, right? If you looked at that video of the Hungarian wood turning thing, the way that they mounted their work to do this turning stuff was to skewer the stick through the middle of it. Mm-hmm. And then suspend the stick on both sides, which you could do with a yoke, and then run the string around it, right?
Yeah.
So they were doing almost exactly the same thing. The only leap was that they took that stick and they skewered the rabbit with it so they could spin it over the fire.
Yeah.
I mean, to get to spindle, I don't think is a huge leap.
I don't either. Yeah, I agree with you.
Especially if
you're totally right. Just spinning the meat over the fire. You're like,
wait a minute.
Yeah.
I've seen that guy with the drill and the bow.
Yeah, or the guy that's drilling the bows over there. He's like watching the cook, and the cook just like, yeah, and then he's like, yeah. But it's like these people were trying to constrain themselves.
Yeah.
Right.
And then they had to break.
Yeah.
Because they had to try and produce a roundness that kind of rivaled what was in the museum.
Yeah.
And somebody had a potter's wheel.
Right.
That's a Sharpie.
That's what's interesting is like what's the difference, right? These people who have knowledges of wheels and bearings and all this stuff are trying not to use them. They're trying their hardest. They want to not use them, right? Versus somebody who is trying to make a vase the best they can, yes, and they want to use whatever makes it the best vase possible, but they don't know about the tech, right? So what is the difference? I think there's a huge difference.
There's a huge difference.
There's a massive difference.
These people were putting limitations on themselves.
Yeah, artificial ones based on current conceptions of ancient people. Yeah. The ancient guy, if you gave him a lathe, he'd be like, hell yeah, right?
As soon as he saw it. Yeah, most likely.
Right. So there's no constraints on him except that he has to come up with it. And the point is that in the process of making them, you start trying to make it not as hard. Yes. And trying to make it so that you can make better ones.
Yeah.
So, the unfortunate thing is that we haven't found any archaeological history of this.
Except the vases.
Except the actual work itself, which bears the witness of how they were made.
Yeah. Do Do you think the coring is a different kind of tech?
I think it has some differences, but I think it shares some as well. How, we still don't know exactly how they were able to move through granite with the ease that it appears that they move through granite with.
Yeah.
We still don't know how they did that exactly. With the evidence that's out there, the witness that's out there on record, just by going and look at these places, pulling those clues together, it's not obvious exactly how they did that. What was their cutter, so to speak, or a braider, or ultrasonic, or combination of any of the above? What exactly was that? Until we actually try to combine some of this stuff and then get some results that clearly look like it can match, clear down to scanning microscope level, it's going to be hard to say.
Yeah. Do you think there's a non-high-tech way to use ultrasonic? Is there a way for they could generate a tone and transfer it to the tool without having more what we would consider modern stuff?
Of course.
Okay.
It's a tuning fork, but that's not necessarily adjustable. You can make them adjustable to a certain degree.
But how do you get
the bow, like a violin bow and a string.
But how do you get that down into the bit? You have a guy standing there playing the violin.
No, he's
Yeah.
traditionally in legend, he's whistling.
Keeps him calm and stress-free. Because those guys were under a lot of stress.
Yeah. Oh, is that hard to drill that hole?
Copyright strikes. Don't do that.
Well, if you look at a violin or a guitar, a violin a little better, and you look at how it's constructed, you got a string, you've got a nut end of this thing where it's got a tuner or whatever, and that's kind of a fixed point. And then you have the string comes back to another point, which is called your bridge.
Yeah.
The bridge is suspended on a diaphragm. And when you run the bow across this and you make the string go back and forth, there is a tension change that happens that pulls on this bridge and moves it up and down and then vibrates the diaphragm, and you have sound, right? So that fact that you've vibrated this thing means that you're going to get a linear motion at the end of that wave. Yeah. It's going to get shorter and longer, right? So if this end is captured, this end is moving, it's got all the movement. You've concentrated that frequency that you've generated with this thing at a point. There's no reason that couldn't be the top of the tool, and it resonates through the tool.
Yeah.
Once again, you need a material that would allow it to resonate through, so metal would probably work better than wood.
Yeah.
Some stones might work better than wood. There's nothing to say that some of these tube drills, why couldn't they have been diorite?
Yeah. I have this cool idea that it's like you wait for the right wind, right? You stretch this long string out in the wind, and it's attached to, that's when like when you got the right wind, that's when you start drilling.
Tool just
starts plunges through.
Handlework.
I mean, clever minds may find other ways to be able to generate a resonant frequency.
Sure.
I mean, we already know some ways that maybe you could, conjure up a way to do this. Once again, it's not on the record.
Yeah.
But it doesn't mean it didn't exist. Yeah, I think it's possible. Okay. Definitely. I don't know what those frequencies are, but we're going to have absolutely fun.
You brought up an interesting idea just in general, like you think of a wheel, and if you have enough cogs on the wheel, like even bumps on the wheel, and it's a big enough wheel, then you can inside spin and actually move quite slowly, but the outside of the wheel creates a vibration, like with bumps or magnets, like it was your suggestion. We were just talking about how do we just create a mechanical oscillator that will reach ultrasonic frequency, and the easiest thing to do would be to put magnets, flipped polarity magnets around the wheel, and you just spin the wheel.
What are magnets?
Yeah, exactly. No one knows what those are.
How do they work?
Bumps.
Certainly, they didn't know it at Avery or whatever that place.
You just need a mechanical vibration at a frequency, so a wheel is a good.
In high school, I made this machine where you have this kind of a drum thing, and I attached magnets to this drum thing in a V shape. And there was another magnet above this drum thing, and in a certain polarity, I forget it, how was it exactly, because it was like 10 years ago, but in a certain polarity, when you
You can't even remember 10 years ago?
You were in high school 10 years ago?
Dude.
well,
Continue with this invention.
Sorry, yeah.
so
We digress. I'm sorry.
I just finished high school 10 years ago. Yeah, actually, that's weird. Whenever.
That is weird. I don't remember how long ago it's been.
So
I do remember high school, though.
this drum thing had magnets in a V shape on its surface, and there was another magnet like actuator or something. When I moved it closer, because of the attraction of the magnets, the drum just moved almost one rotation. I had to lift this actuator, I call it actuator, I had to lift this up, back again, after it moved a little bit over to this
One revolution?
yeah, kind of this final point. And then if I did it again, it was rotating almost one full rotation again. And with the linear motion, I can create a rotation. And that's how I thought maybe in a different way, or in the opposite way, if we reverse it, we could make a vibration.
Exactly.
That was the idea on the Nile.
It was perfect on the Nile, and with enough points around the circumference of that wheel, with a fairly slow rotation, like you could put donkeys at work turning a big wheel that had, like we were just saying, simple bumps, but those bumps are moving past a single point at ultrasonic frequency levels.
Yeah, and you could tune it by getting them to go a little faster, a little slower until you got the right frequency to plunge through.
I mean, this is not. I just thought, like, of course, like that's not that hard to come up with. And that would provide even, possibly the dynamic range, like the actual force that you needed, as opposed to sound or, something, one of these, like, it seems hard to imagine like sound resonance going down or.
You ever played with a tuning fork?
Yes. Pretty powerful tool. But yeah.
All that motion of this thing doing this is turned into this. If you put it on the table,
Yeah.
the light rate goes.
Yeah, for sure. That's right.
Yep, I agree.
So you can have some guy up there just hitting it with a hammer and just keeping it going while the turning is happening.
The WAS stuff.
Again, you need rigid materials for that. Copper is not going to make a very good tuning fork unless it's hardened.
Or you just put 100 guys on a bike, and they are turning it.
There is
And based on the
evidence of the
material,
bicycle.
based on the material, you can pick the diameter, and here we go.
Yeah.
But maybe this is, this tuning fork idea became known in legend as the shamir.
Yeah,
This tool that could cut through stone like butter.
like butter. Yeah.
And it was something that somebody could hold or steal or go and find, and it was lost, and there's this whole thing about it.
And I remember the way you had to store it was real strange too. You could imagine that it was, when you're reading about it, like they needed to pack it in this and don't store it in metal, right? Yeah. And you start to think, like, what does that mean? But maybe it's because
They packed it in grains.
you're trying to dampen a vibration.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Where is this story coming from? I never heard this.
Multiple sources, but it's
A concept of a mythical tool that could cut any stone, even jewels, like it was cutting through butter. Some very powerful ancient thing.
But they mentioned the shape of it, or never.
Not the shape, just how it needed to be stored.
But it's often associated with a bird too.
There's strange myths with
Really
animals.
weird myths about how you have to get it. We've been wondering about it for a long time. Maybe there's
So when
clues in these myths to what this thing was.
What was the tuning fork in Egypt? Someone take a photo of the one of the museums.
The was
Maybe. Yeah. It was in Cairo, the Egyptian Museum.
at the bottom of the was staff is a fork, like you know.
Well, maybe at some point we will know. I have no idea, but I hope this scanning project will kind of further this topic.
It will, I think, in whatever the truth is about it.
Yeah,
It will further the topic.
refine the questions and lead to
We might be able to back into the frequency thing by using a frequency generator. Once we know the frequencies that you can use, then you can see if it's possible in more kind of mechanical ways to duplicate that frequency. I mean, maybe it is something that can be done
Reverse engineer
with a
it,
tuning fork of some sort. That would be pretty cool.
What do you think about the saw cuts?
Once again, looking at most of the places I've seen, you still see what looks like a disc, or some kind of sheet that has a bit of a taper before it gets to the bottom, or where it cuts, right, like this outer edge. There's taper here.
Yeah.
But all of the ones I've seen have a taper and then a relatively flat end and a pretty tight corner. So they're not like rounded off. Most of them have a flat bottom, tapered sides up into a thing. And my feeling is, once again, we're kind of into this argument between free abrasive and fixed abrasive. To me, would be more consistent with something that was using fixed abrasive.
Yeah.
Especially if it could maintain its end surface. The other thing is that, why does it look like that? You're trying to design a tool that's going to have relatively good life. The more points that you can have to get to your final slot that you're cutting in something, the longer it's going to last.
Oh yeah.
Right? So you're spreading out some of that work over that tapered area, if those are all fixed, such that this blunt area in the front doesn't have to remove the whole width of the kerf of that saw.
But doesn't it seem like some of them would have been pretty large diameter blades based on the curve?
Yeah, I mean,
It doesn't have to be a saw all the way to the hub, but
But you can also have a disc that's being moved on an axis, right? Like
yeah,
an
like
arm
a
that's
pendulum. The pendulum idea is another possibility. That's not that different than a circular saw.
like a reciprocating.
Yeah.
But what about the elevation, and how would you how would you let it down?
There's complications.
Thank you.
Once again, I don't.
Thank you for the answer.
Once again, I don't know that those complications aren't solvable in less than a generation. And we know that most likely most of these techniques or technologies were generated over multiple generations, refined,
And forgotten.
and then ultimately forgotten.
You've never seen the big, the trap thing? It like goes up and clicks down.
Maybe between the clicks you can decrease it
Yeah.
or lower it.
Oh, no, I can't remember the name of that.
You have a guy way out there with the rope, and you're like, let it down, right?
Yeah, but when? When do you let it down? Exactly.
Somebody watching, I don't know. Yeah, it's a good question. How do you keep it rigid too, so that it's not doing any of this?
To keep the consistent striations, how would you lower it in time and just complex?
And if you had the spindle, you could actually have a giant circular saw.
Yeah, I think a big disc or a big circular saw is.
And maybe it's being spun
Reciprocating, it
by
seems.
like the old rope starters that you put on outboard motors. It's a bunch of guys towing a rope that's spinning this thing, and it's like, okay, we're gonna get through this block. Keep going, guys.
Oh, it's wrapped all the way around the. It's okay, go.
I mean, it's feasible. Come on, what's all the problem? And if you've got, armies and armies, legions of laborers, when those guys get too tired and they die, just get some fresh ones. I mean, there's a lot of that thrown around, like, oh, they had thousands and thousands of laborers.
Yeah, I think we're still not sure if they had slavers or slaves in the Old Kingdom or in the pre-dynastic era. So
I was just going off what other people use as excuses for this stuff.
Yeah, I mean the other.
Labor at it. Yeah. So you can fix this with labor.
Yeah, you just need enough guys.
enough time and guys
Yeah.
for the merch and for the sponsors.
Tonight's sponsor.
This episode is brought to you by the Guinness. Thank you guys for having this interesting conversation and also for the help. And it was a 10 days of my life, very special 10 days. And I love
10 days of my life, yeah.
seems that to be that is special for you, right? I think you were pleased to have the core in hands.
Yeah. I got a long time with it. It's good.
He's been trapped in this house with us
I know this poor guy.
for 10 days.
Looking at the core.
He did try to burn us down once.
I certainly got you guys up. I set off the smoke alarm at like 8 in the morning.
Burn some toast
After these guys were up until 3 at night, burning some toast.
and closing the fire curtain. Fire curtain went down.
How'd you turn that thing off? Yeah, then it set off the fire curtain. The guy couldn't get out, and I'm like, oh, crap.
Cataries up there. Chris, come push the button.
Push the button. Let us out.
Well, and it didn't work. I mean, you could hear the motor struggling.
Yeah, couldn't pick it up. Yeah.
Anyways, thanks a lot.
Yes.
Thanks a lot for being here and for the help and for the talk.
Cheers, gentlemen. That was
Cheers.
fantastic.
Probably see you soon here or in Italy on the next
Or in Egypt.
vase scanning project.
Next time.
Fantastic.
Where can they find you guys, the audience?
We have a podcast called Brothers of the Serpent, brothersoftheserpent.com. Here's the logo. We have merch. And you can find us. Just search anywhere you find podcasts, Brothers of the Serpent, or on YouTube. We have hundreds of episodes talking about this kind of stuff. So,
And you?
And if you ride bikes, we got stuff for that.
can I have a bike?
Baby. It's more parts now. Yeah. And we have merch too.
All right. Yeah. I want that Chris King hat.
Yeah, this is a special one.
Yeah.
This is for the development teams.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right. I'll steal it while he's sleeping.
Where'd my hat go?
You can burn
Set
some
off the
toast
fire
and
alarm
go
and
up.
leave.
Yeah.
The curtain closes on him. You got his hat. See ya.
Thanks.
Awesome, dudes.
It's been a rough week.
Like, actually, this
They've been tame too, I can tell.
forgetting this shit, I think it's a perfect indicator of getting so tired of these 10 days.
Oh, yeah. So we left in the morning and forgot this one important piece because I'd put a placemat over the top of it and camouflaged it.
Perfect.
Yeah. So I'd set that on top of it,
It was totally hidden.
and they didn't see it. I'm like, I had this premonition when I put them up there because I was trying to get them out of the way, and I'm like, I wonder if that's camouflage on the ditch. And then I just like, I'm going to bed.
Yeah.
Sure enough, we got down there. It's like, the look on your face was precious.
Oh, no. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I mean, like,
Oh, crap.
I had no idea how much time will be lost,
Yeah.
but it was actually
Yeah, every
quite
minute
fast.
was pretty critical to get through all that scanning.
I hauled ass.
But at least the scanning went better today than it went the first day.
I mean, we could scan more data and more. I mean, the scan database now is much more diverse than it was on the first day. We have more bows and also these new kind of vases and cores, and yeah, it was better.
Yeah, we saw some amazing stuff. And thank you so much to the Petrie Museum and all their staff.
Yes, they are so
Fantastic people.
kind,
Fantastic
helpful,
people.
welcoming, accommodating a lot.
And fun to hang out with. They were really cool. Just, working with all day. It was great. On top of just being very helpful and welcoming. So much thanks.
And Guinness, please support me.
Cheers.
Cheers,
Good
guys.
luck on that one. But submit a proposal.
A massive thank you to my incredible supporters, Oniku, Oannes, Sarah Cox, Vasana, and Sevenrin. Your generosity fuels this journey into ancient technology, keeping this show alive and pushing my research further than ever. As the ancient Egyptians would say, Ankh Veja Seneb.